Hello everyone, and welcome to the internally screening review of A Plague of Zombies, directed by John Gilling. This is on our Hooptober list, which we have been surely but slowly getting through. This was for the requirement of having two Hammer films. Me and Adam, I think for people our age, I think we're actually quite Hammer experienced.
Yeah.
This is not our first rodeo with Hammer films.
No.
For those not in the know, Hammer was a sort of 50s, 60s prime era horror movie studio. Very, very English, very, very cheap, but did sort of churn out some iconic films back in the day. Lots of films.
And some iconic actors as
Yes,
well.
for
Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing.
And just a lot of horror films. Also some sort of non-horror stuff, some thrillers, some Sherlock Holmes adaptations, all very British stuff. And A Plague of Zombies is one of the lesser known ones. Not that many people have seen it as far as I can tell. And it is very, 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 very British. It is essentially A Holiday to Cornwall, but if there were zombies, which I just love the sound of. So obviously had to put this on here. I haven't seen that many films set in Cornwall for a start.
True. Yeah.
And I was also just intrigued by a film set in the 60s that was about zombies, because to me, growing up in the 90s and 2000s, both of us were there for the big zombie boom that really just felt like it had an absolute death grip on culture to the point of exhaustion eventually. Until it just suddenly wasn't a thing anymore. And I was intrigued to see, how the zombie horror thing has evolved over the years. Because, I've seen the George Romero stuff, but I know that it would be very thematically different in the 60s. And I was like, what is this film going to be about? And I didn't really have very high hopes for this film, but I was massively pleasantly surprised. What did you think of A Plague of Zombies?
Well, I think, as with many of the Hammer films you've seen, it was endlessly charming. I was a big fan of our lead actor,
Andre Morrell.
Andre Morrell. He's, our grey-haired, mustachioed silver fox of a lead.
He's great.
He has great gravitas and screen presence to him. Carries a lot of the film, a lot of the sort of weightier sort of acting chops on his back. He's
committed.
Yeah, he's the real backbone of the film. The film itself, there seems to be a knowing kind of cheesiness to the whole thing. Given its cheapness, I think Hammer has an understanding of the product it was making.
Oh yeah.
And there's some great sort of edits and cuts throughout where things had timed nicely to kind of really make fun of the situation they're in. It's ridiculous, but surprisingly creative.
Yeah.
There were things we were hoping the film would do and avenues that we were hoping it would go down that it then actually pursued.
Yeah.
And we were like, well, this is surprisingly interesting, and there were some thematic things that actually had some weight to them in this film, in spite of it just being from the outside a cheesy zombie horror.
Yeah, I completely agree. This film actually kind of surprised me in almost every element that I kind of expect a Hammer film to falter in. Because the thing is with a Hammer film is typically what I found is a lot of the classics, even like the Frankensteins and the Draculas and the Mummies, what you have is one really, really good actor doing some really great stuff, some pretty nice set design, a cool vibe, but generally the plotting kind of wavers and it gets a bit boring and it looks really cheap and the film wraps up really abruptly. And this film, it's actually, for a start, surprisingly well directed in a very subtle way. It's not Stanley Kubrick or anything.
Yeah.
And there are, it's still cheap. It's still a Hammer film. You're still going to look at that and go, obviously that's fake. And obviously it's silly. You literally got zombies going around going like,
yeah, and it's just like bad face paint and masks that look like they were made in a day.
But I would obviously be kind of disappointed if it didn't have that. But I was mostly shocked at the acting was all around pretty fucking good.
Yeah.
All of the main actors, the only kind of weak point is the female lead, who doesn't really offer much. She isn't terrible, and I think she plays the character okay, but she's not great, I guess.
I think it's probably also down to the characterization as well, where she is just, her presence there is kind of undefined from the get-go, and it's so inevitable that character is there to be
get captured
and nearly die and shit like that, so it's forgivable on that.
And I just thought also the directing just had a kind of energy and creativity to it that I didn't expect, and it made some really interesting and neat choices where I think a lot of, especially the sort of lower tier, cheaper Hammer horror films, where especially when you got two characters having a conversation or something, they're generally just kind of willing to put the camera down, do a cut back, and just kind of let it play out. This film isn't really satisfied with that, and it's got some quite clever blocking and framing, and the camera's moving around. You've got some interesting angles that seem to thematically play into it. It's not, high tier filmmaking shit, and it doesn't need to be, and it just kind of does it well. Even though it does pretty obvious things, it's just really refreshing to see something just kind of present itself visually in a an effective way.
Yeah. I think one thing this film does that we couldn't necessarily tell was intentional or not, there's some very humorous cuts in this. So the film opens up, you've got like maybe the most stereotypical voodoo like ritual going on, where there's a bunch of people playing bongos and a man doing something with blood, and they're all wearing masks and things like that. And then it's like bang, cut to like stately home. Oh yes, oh darling, yes. You know, it's shit like that. Like our main character's like fixing a light bulb. It looks like he's just like dicking around, and it's like, okay, well that's a cut. And there are moments throughout where you've got like these really serious things happening, and like bang, okay, we're doing the next thing now, and like there's a certain it aids the pacing. The film never really feels like it's bogged down in any one idea or scene for too long.
It's very ruthlessly efficient. It just kind of goes from bit to bit where it needs to.
And it does. It kind of adds levity to. There are moments of seriousness, but it is still aware of its overall ridiculousness. It also commits to violence in a way that I wasn't expecting for such an old film.
For sure.
There's a particularly excellent bit where we were both really hoping someone would get decapitated, and they did get decapitated, and we were like, oh shit, this is amazing. Like, I can't believe it's a really silly effect. Like, they cut to like there's when they show the person, there's like they've got a spade and they hit them in the neck, but then the shot they cut to, you don't see the person's head at all. You get like a weird awkward shot of like the shoulder, and then the head just sort of falls down on the floor.
Great.
It's very silly, but it works really well. And then towards the end, right at the end in fact, we have all of the zombies get set on fire.
With a pretty neat setup for it as well.
Yeah.
So just in terms of plotting, so it's established early on that essentially the bad guy in this film, he has the ability, using his sort of voodoo magic, if he has this kind of special made voodoo doll of whoever he has got a sample of blood from, that he has control of them, and whatever happens to the doll, classic voodoo doll, will happen to them in some way. And this is how he eventually ends up getting the woman summoned to his lair. That's how she gets captured, which is kind of a unique way for them to get captured.
That's cool.
Doesn't really make sense when you look at it plot wise, because the guy was chasing after the whole time and she was like walking there, but you could ignore stuff like that. And then as our other main character, Forbes, the stately Englishman doctor of medicine, has been investigating what's going on, he gets in a fight with one of the bad guy's henchmen, and then the room with a bunch of the dolls catches fire, and then as our other hero arrives to save the woman from this mine full of zombies being worked as slaves, which is just a great detail. All of the zombies start catching fire with this pretty neat, like, what would it have been?
I don't know, it must have been like some kind of like, they must have been wearing like protective clothing underneath, and then in the layer between the clothing on the outside there was some kind of like
smoke.
Because it starts off as smoke and then it catches fire,
which is such a neatly detailed thing that with the Hammer horror film, it's cheap and it's quick. You just expect them to just catch fire, right? But it's so neat to see them do the thing.
They gradual, like the room's like all smoky and like everyone's kind of confused, and then they all start catching fire. It's like really like nice detail, and being all practical effects, remarkably impressive. I think like in its execution. I don't know how long these people spent on fire, but it feels like a while, and you're like, oh, damn, they didn't give a fuck back in the day.
We also noticed the scene where our character is in the room and it's caught fire, and there's sort of a brief bit of peril where he's trying to get out of the flaming room. He was obviously the big name actor, and it really does look like
he's just in a room that's on fire.
Yeah, or as you said when we were watching it looks like they probably did some forced perspective stuff. But there's a couple of wide shots where you see his silhouette with the fire, and there's bits where he's quite clearly just near some fire. So it's quite impressive how committed he is, not just in his performance, because he's taking it completely seriously.
Oh yeah,
which is great, because that kind of just
elevates the comedy. Yeah. I think regardless of how silly a film is, if everyone within the film is taking it seriously, I think that's a real core. Like, it really cements the danger.
It makes it so much more fun to watch.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Another thing I found really interesting about this film were the themes. And the Hammer films have flirted with racism on more than one occasion. And this film certainly has a sort of dated element to it, with the Haitian voodoo that it sort of goes into. But it actually takes a really interesting... It spins it in a way that's actually dated quite well, I think, outside of the kind of generic, a little bit racist imagery.
Like a fear of like foreign
Haitian bongos and like the fear of the foreign. It actually seems to twist that into a pretty pertinent criticism of colonialism, where the zombies are sort of being turned into this slave workforce.
Yeah. No, I thought that was an oddly cutting criticism for the time. Yeah, where sitting oddly, like you say, with this, oh yeah, Haitian voodoo, we should be scared of this strange like foreign religion or practice. But I like that they set it up early on, where they have like this abandoned tin mine, which is, you know, big industry in Cornwall. So I guess that's a nice like tying it into the geography of it all. They're like, oh, it's haunted, and we were when they introduced it, we were like, that would be an odd detail for them to just chuck in and not use any further. And at that moment, I think you said, oh, are they going to be? Is he going to be turning them to slaves? And we were like, that's too clever. The film would never do that.
Yeah.
And then they turn and they do one cut, and then it's like they're all like down there with their pickaxes. Like, no, they fucking did it. The madmen. Like, that was just very.
But it works so well as a metaphor, right? Because the whole point is the main villain is they talk about him like, oh, that's Mr. I forget his name. He went off on his travels and he came back and he never really spoke to anyone. So he's literally like a sort of colonizer who went over and like appropriated this magic to use it to, you know, subjugate people. And, you know, the film like it's obviously quite cartoonish. Like I noticed like a funny detail that's is silly and funny, but also kind of like good criticism that the film is sort of applying metaphorically, which is that the people are whipping the zombies, which just seems so like cartoonishly cruel, because the zombies were just zombies.
They were just doing it anyway. They were like, they seemed to be like kind of out of it, you know, they're just like doing whatever, and they're still whipping them.
And it's just like, it's so committed to like, it's quite an on the nose criticism of like British colonialism applied in like quite an interesting and also cartoonish way. But yeah, I actually thought that was like a really surprisingly strong element of the film.
Yeah, and it builds to it leaves as a nice crescendo for it all, you know. Everyone gets set on fire, the mine collapses, and our heroes escape, and we get our predictably abrupt cut to credits moment. And,
very abrupt.
But it felt earned. It didn't feel as rushed and as ridiculous as so many of those sorts of endings feel in like sort of 50s and 60s cinema. You know, as we've said before, the pacing was really tight. Just a wonderful final climax.
What did you think? What would you rate it?
I often find it hard to give like films of this era or of this type particularly high ratings, but I think I'd go with like a 6 out of 10. But largely because I think some of its cheapness and some of its plainness, for all of its sort of like subtle stylistic differences with other films of the same ilk, it's still quite plain at the end of the day, and I think there's more you could do with this, and it is hampered by the limitations of its budget and its studio in so much of its format, but thoroughly enjoyable and definitely like one to return to, which is always nice with some of these cheap
doesn't feel as disposable.
No, not at all. No, and remarkable for like one of a B movie by even their standards. So what about you?
7 out of 10.
Yeah,
I thought it was genuinely just a good film. I mean, I feel like it's a fair criticism. The film is cheap and it does look like shit sometimes. But I think there are enough points where I think story-wise it is nothing remarkable, but it is just I found it effective, and I liked the characters. The acting was just surprisingly great all around, and I liked a lot of the ensemble cast as well, as like cheesy and funny as they were, like the police, just like very good comic relief.
They were cool,
and some of the like recurring villagers in the town make for some kind of interesting characters. Yeah. And I like how committed it was to this kind of lore around how the zombies work. I actually thought the set design was pretty great, especially the mine set at the end, where especially some of the outside shots, you have this kind of really gorgeous silhouette of the mines against the sky. And even the zombies looked ridiculous. I just can't hate it for that. I mean, like, I guess the one thing I'd say is it's not very scary as a horror film. No. But I think the villain kind of felt motivated enough. It had like actual kind of tense scenes in it, even if they weren't scary. Like there's a great scene where, you know, he's like trying to get her blood. I thought that was like wonderfully tense in such a cheesy way.
Yeah, and what I really liked about that is then when he's starting to do the voodoo preparations, she's like at a funeral and her wound starts bleeding again.
Yeah, that was
like,
great.
That was really cool. They must have had like some like vial or like a squib thing underneath a bandage. It was just really like lovely detail that showed the extra effort that had gone into this film.
And like I said, what a normal Hammer horror film, I said this when we were watching it, is I feel like your standard Hammer horror film would just play those two scenes separately and just play them out. So you have this scene of him doing his ritual, and then you just cut to the funeral and she starts bleeding. But this film kind of intercuts between them, and it's like that kind of just like next level of effort that maybe I'm just surprised at how much I like the film. Maybe I'm kind of overrating it, but yeah, I just felt like it's actually just quite a good film, and I would happily watch it again and show it to someone else, because I prefer this to a lot of the more acclaimed Hammer horror films and like some of the Sherlock Holmes stuff that they've done.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's probably one of my favourite Hammer horror films. So yeah, I actually really enjoyed it.
I'd put it up there with the Hammer Dracula.
Yeah, for sure. I might even prefer it. So that has been the Internally Screening review of The Plague of Zombies. If you like this video, give it a like. If you dislike this video, give it a dislike. If you want to see more Hooptober stuff, there's more coming. Hit subscribe. We've got podcasts, we've got James Bond, and you know, we're here a week. We've got all kinds of stuff cooking. We're gonna have tier lists. Do you reckon we'll ever get a whole Hammer horror tier list?
Oh my word.
Could you
Eventually,
imagine?
yeah, why not?
I mean, there are hundreds, my god. If we could cut it down to the classics,
God.
maybe.
Yeah, maybe. That would
be an undertaking for very little views.
Yeah, well,
the nichest fucking video.
oh my god.
But you know, let us know if you would be interested in that. Probably not. But anyways, I've been Adam.
I've been Rupert.
And we'll catch you next time. Peace.
Peace.